Okay, thank you, RC. Uh, Welcome to this session. Today we are planning to discuss the short story writing. What goes into short stories, uh, environment, what makes appropriate case for short story, and also different types of short stories which are there for like journal readership. Then there are stories for children. Then there are detective stories, and as we know that there are experimental stories. So first, as per the ritual, we will take a small recapitulation of what we discussed yesterday. That was Saturday. We covered two blocks. Those were the block 3 and block 4 of DCE 2. Block 3 was regarding, you know, the block 4 was about the interviews, and block 3 was regarding the travel writing. So during the travel writing discussion, we, came to know that travel or tourism, tourist who travels to destination. So the travel writing is very specific writing, and it has gained importance because tourism industry is almost a parallel industry and the backbone of any nation's economy. Therefore, this is a very serious uh, case for study and also a serious case for writing about the traveling, tourism, tourists, and so forth. We discussed what is the appropriate background material for travel writing. So we know that we have history books, we have magazines, journals, then there are a lot of reports, there are a lot of studies, and there are folk literature. All this makes very fit case for travel writing. I know we also understood during the discussion that it is very important that the changing environment of the travel industry is taken into account for travel writing, because there has been a lot of change previously on the ancient and olden times. We have people coming particularly to study the culture, study people, and they used to stay for a pretty long time. They would embark upon one very long journey, and during that period, they will, visit various places, learn their culture, and after maybe years and many years after, they will return back to their home country. They would bring a lot of experiences with them. But today, with the fast moving transportation and other means of communication, the tourists are coming not that too long stay, but for sometimes very short stay, maybe a day or two, maybe 3 to 4 days, a week or 2 weeks at the maximum. So the need for writing for that kind of travel has become very emergent today. It is also important that travel writing uh, should be based or should utilize the available resources. Let me say the travel. creative writer who is writing on travel and tourism has to take help from the maps. As I told you yesterday, a map can be interpreted in hundreds of ways. It can be for destinations, it can be for transportation, it can be for climate, it can be for geography, it can be for various other factors to study. And then, there is a literature, there is specifically the creative art, which is very prominent, and all this help the creative writer on travel to make his or her writings worthwhile. Then we also discussed as to what should be avoided. It is very important that a travel writer is very, very clear about what he or she is writing, and also have gathered factual information, because if misrepresentation is done, it can bring disreputation to not only to destination, not only to a particular industry, but nation as a whole as well. Uh, we also discussed interviews, what makes fit case for interview, and also what are the preliminaries or the planning or things to do for conducting an interview. During the discussion, we learned that there should be proper planning, and the person whom we think is an appropriate person for interview, then we must very cordially approach that person. And once that person has been approached, then maybe if in one attempt he or she is not ready, then we should keep on pursuing, following the person. So follow up is very important. And once it is scheduled, then we should be very ready. We should have equipments if at all we are using. And if we have to note down the points, then there must be a person to note down the points. Besides this, it is very important how the interview is conducted. So we discussed, like, if we are interviewing people from the rural areas, then we must not be biased as citizens from the urban areas. No one can be judged by one's apparel or by one's look. So we have to be very, very careful. In fact, one has to be very, very respectful to any person of this society, because uh, uh, not all the time, not all the people are important, but at some times, some very ordinary people are also very important. So maybe if there is a municipal commissioner's office, some some engineer who is working or who is supervising the development in the water sources, then the right person to interview about water sources and the development case would be the engineer, not the commissioner. Because commissioner can give you information, but the type of information that we require is not coming from the commissioner. So we have to be very careful as to whom to approach for what. Then the interview should be conducted in a very cordial, in a very healthy atmosphere, where the speaker should be allowed to to speak on the questions, whatever questions have been scheduled. And the interview should goes smoothly, there shouldn't be unwanted interruption. And finally, the interview recorded or noted should also be discussed with the person concerned so that there is no misrepresentation of the facts or the information. And finally, one very important point is that the person who has been interviewed shouldn't be made responsible for any issue that might arise out of this particular interview, because the person has only spoken to you in confidence. Until unless one is in official position, no one can be held responsible for the information that is provided through interview. Let me just re uh, affirm here that we are talking about travel writing, and let me just inform you that travel writing is also a kind of feature writing, because we are having information, and upon that information we are writing. So it is very important that the interview should be well planned. The person should be contacted in advance, given ample time. We should, the travel writer, the travel writers, or the person who is conducting interview should keep on following and make sure that everything is ready for the interview. So with this, I come to an end of the recapitulatory session. So today we will be, moving to block the course 3, which is DCE03, and it is entitled Short Story. So we all know what is story, and then we will discuss today block 1 of short story, and it has 4 blocks. In fact, let me just give you an overview for the DCE3. So DCE3 has 4 blocks. The first block, which we will discuss today, is the basic elements of short story. The second block is writing for children. That means writing stories for children. Third one is the detective stories, and the fourth one is experimental stories. I'm sure if we take a cursory look of the 4 blocks that are part of the DCE3, which is short story, then the first block is dedicated to discuss the basic elements, what makes or what goes into making a story. While second one is very specific, that is writing short stories for children. The third one is also very specific. We all know that there are formula stories, then there are specialized or specific stories, and one such branch of stories is the detective stories. We have seen heard a lot of detective stories. We have seen the cinematization of many detective stories, or there are certain different types of stories like haunted stories, haunting stories, and so forth. And then finally we have experimental stories. So let me just explain a bit about experimental stories. There are these days people are explaining one particular aspect of the story to a great length. So they are making new approaches to the story, like autobiography is one such format where a person talks about one's own self instead of talking about the other subjects. So this was the material or the points which we will discuss in DCE 3 in 4 blocks. So we will come to block 1, and block 1 is the basic elements of short story. What do you mean by basic elements? Basic elements means what is the theoretical base, what is the form, what is the structure, and how story gets into becoming a story. So this will be discussed in the block 1 of DCE 3. In the block 1, which is basic elements of short story, deals with the basic, I should say, concept of short story and its developmental aspects, its structure, its form, and its environment. So there is a story, there is an environment for a story. Definitely, only then the story moves ahead, then its treatment, and then more importantly, the role of different characters. Atmosphere is one such element which brings about ambience to the story. Means it gives us the settings for the story. And we will also discuss, the narrative part, how the stories are narrated. So in the beginning, I would like to make a small statement. What is story? It is a this can be a very general question or a very simple question. So there is a simple answer to it. A story that is told. So that means it is narrated. So the story is primarily narrated. You might have heard a statement, story unfolds. So what do you mean by unfolding? Unfolding refers to that it is told. So when something is narrated, something is told, then there is a small situation which is created, environment is built, and in which the story will be told. So that means there has to be basis, there has to be place where the story is told. So told means story is already there, but it is yet to come. It is yet to come. So if you look at the structure of the story, its narratives, strategy, we understand that story initially creates an environment, creates ambience, then within that ambience, the story is keeps on unfolding gradually, and then after reaching the climax, it comes to an end. Then we feel story has been told. But after the story has been told, we come to know that, oh, this was the story. So story is very technically a very difficult area also. Though most of the creative writers feel that story is very easy to write. Of course, it is very easy to write when one has practiced a lot. So, the basic purpose of discussion in the block 1, which is the basic elements of short story. Within this basic elements of short story, let us first focus our attention on the plot or the structure of the story. We all know that a short story is unique or distinct as to poem and other writings because there is always a plot. So if that plot is there, there has to be a structure. If the structure is there, then there has to be developmental aspect of it. And then it's climax and then conclusion. So a story has form, a story has its meaning, a story has the readability, means narrative part, and then it has the ending part. So it does. So story also moves just like any other genre, literary genre. It takes the shape, it takes the form, it conveys the meaning, it provides the reading, and it ends. So let us come to the very important aspects of story, which is form. Uh, Form is something which gives in truism shape to the plot. So if there is a famous story, then its plot must be very sound, and its form or basic structure should be very, very creative, attractive, and interesting to the reader. There is a saying that all art is an order to form. All art is an order to form. This is very important statement because all art means whatever creations, particularly creative writings, are there. They are order to form means they follow. They are always in a specific form or in structure. So this is very important because uh, when one is making the story appear, then if there is no plot, then the reader is just deceived. There has to be very clear plot. That means there has to be very clear sound footing or ground upon which the story is to be built. If that is there, then that is the first stage of form, means it is taking form. From where it will take form? From the plot. Uh, so, you know, a very important aspect of the short story is that it should be interesting. What is interesting? Interesting is something that capture our attention, that demands the attention of the reader. So how this becomes, interesting? It must have proper design. Uh, that means it must have proper form. Uh, that would also, convey that if it has proper form, then it must have proper beginning and it must have proper ending. It must have proper beginning and it must have proper ending. So this may also be called the design or form. So if there is a proper design, that means if there is a proper plot, then there is beginning, then there is progression, then there is climax, and then there is end. So that means it has proper design. So the design is very much important because it will provide a structure, and from the labyrinths of discussion, labyrinths of creativity, uh, design, a story will keep on moving ahead. So it is very important that author who is writing short story is very clear about the direction. What direction one is taking his or her short story to. So, uh, take the general stories which are uh, mostly, you know, read or which are in large numbers. They have a little stunning beginning, then they move, they progress, and then there is a misunderstanding which is deliberately brought into the short story, because if it is not there, it will not capture or it will not keep the readers with the story. And it is the basic idea of making it suspense, making it full of suspense, or making it unpredictable is very important, because the reader, the pathak will always be with it if it is like that. If it is very clear in its message, clear narratives, then the reader will read the fact and then one would simply escape from that study, from that story. But if it has a lot of suspense, unpredictability, complexities, then the reader will look for the grand finale or proper end. So until the end has come, there is craving in the mind of the reader. So, so a very conscious author, a short story writer, will always, put misunderstanding, will create suspense, will see and ensure that such this, the plot is taken to the climax. So we have already understood what is climax. Climax is the resolution of the improbabilities or the complexities. But it is not a very resolution in the sense that it doesn't give clear verdict. But if we look at the closing of a story, then sort of the situation which is created that seems to be finally reconciliatory or moving towards reconciliation. Or some tragic stories, we know that the tragic happening is tragic situation is created, and then the readers is sort of left to lurch and seek the answer. So this is very important that it has proper design. Design means it has proper plot, it has beginning, it develops, it reaches the climax. That means it has a structure, then it has proper narratives, then it has a proper conclusion. Another very important part of um, basic element that goes into short story, that is its manner of telling. Now I think I will not repeat it, because I have already told you stories, that is what story is, that what is told. So what is told means it is not storytelling in the nukkad or in the street telling, but we are talking about the story which is told. So it has to be told in terms of dialogues, monologues, dialogues, situation, and there will be characters uh, who will be helping to take the story forward. So first of all, it's very important that there is a sense of movement, because there shouldn't be a stale statement. There was a king and he died. That's the matter. We say there was a king, he had a huge kingdom, he married several, he had several wives, a number of children. One of his favorite daughter was Alice. Alice was a nature-loving, joyful child and very dear to all the members of the royal court, like this. So you will create a lot of probabilities, a lot of scope for movement, and that makes your story important for the reader, because then he is expecting. So there should be sense of movement in the plot itself, which which arouse the interest of the reader, and also allows the working of the reader's mind on it. He should start thinking, oh, something will happen now. Then it should be involving. Means it should take along the the reader. Uh, so it shouldn't leave the reader behind. At the same time, the narrative should be such that they are repeatedly representing the characters. If there is a clown who is the Dushak, who is speaking something, just like we see in drama, then his or her language should be uh, befitting to that particular character. In stories, we see if two friends are talking to each other, then their narratives will also be in the same fashion, at the same level. But if maybe somebody is asking his servant or help man to bring in something to prepare some food, then in Hindi short stories we say, रामू काका जरा जाके रसोई में देखना, अभी खाना बनने में कितनी देर है, मुझे बड़ी भूख लगी है, क्या आप मेरे लिए कुछ अल्पाहार ला सकते हैं? हाँ हाँ, क्यों नहीं किया, मैं अभी लाता हूँ. इस तरह such dialogues can make story very lucid, and it uh, creates a sense of movement, and at the same time sense of suspense, and two characters who are there to be part of the short story. They continue, they carry the story forward through the narratives. So narratives should be such that they create loop and scope for Sorry, I missed the contact for a moment. So, as I mentioned, that every story must give some message, and the message should come through the narratives. So narratives should be constructed in such a way that they lead a message, and that message should be dealing with at least some aspect of human life. Uh, like any other writing, there has to be climax in the story also. But climax in the story is usually not very logical. See, the event should be happening in a structural manner, but not necessarily by logical culmination. So logical culmination is sometimes we have happenings which abruptly takes place and then bring in some climax. So even some people have called this anti-climax. That means the story is not that way moving to climax. Some unannounced happens, and then that unfolds into the heightening of the experience. So this is kind of anti-climax, but it is not a negative. It is not a negation of the climax. So climax means the climax which is otherwise coming at a particular point of place, time. If that happens before that particular point, then it is anti-climax, and it is part of the climax. Uh, Definitely, in short story, also, if we talk about the climax as to the resolution of the conflict, it is not necessarily a resolution of the conflict. And then another part is that the element of surprise. You see, suspense and surprise, these are two things. One is suspense, and the other one is the surprise. While suspense is very important element in the short story, surprise is not a very uh, definitive element in the story, because if the story is satisfying to the reader's highest enjoyment, or if it meets his experiences, then see the surprising or the events or situation which is highly surprising may not be desired in the short story. So that means the short story must have an element of suspense, not the surprise. Uh, if we move little ahead, and then we go to the other aspect of the basic elements that are there in the short story, we see that the environment is very important. The atmosphere is very important. We have also spoken about the environment, the atmosphere, and the basic theme or the basis. We discussed it. So, in relation to a short story, you see, atmosphere means it is some kind of environment, some kind of situation. We discuss the situation. If situation is not there, creative writing will not take place. Why it is so? Because atmosphere is one that sets the story in time. What it means? We have historical stories. We have stories that talks about the past events. We have short stories that talk about the present. We have short stories. They talk about the freedom struggle. They talk about the era of Renaissance. They talk about the post-colonialism. They talk about the British Raj, the Mughal period, the Ashoka period. There are short stories. There are description of events. There are stories based on computer. I mean, even the technology is not beyond the imagination of the short story writer. So means there are short stories which are written in all the period and in every situation. So what is situation? What is situation? Situation is the atmosphere in which the short story is set in time. Means it is set to happen. So this is what is meant by atmosphere. So it is another aspect of the set in time means putting into situation, putting into the environment. It has also to be put in locale. Say if there is a story about two friends who were very close from the very early part of the life, say for schooling, eventually they uh, join different institutions for higher studies, and afterwards they meet at some point of time. They discuss about the achievements in their respective lives. Then what are they doing? They are talking about the early life which they spent in the school together. So the story has to be set in time in school time. Many years back, things were things might not be as developed as they are today. Then it has to be put into an environment of the school. The narratives have to be of a school of school children, students, teachers, other things that happen in the school. When they talk about their higher education, their narratives, the description of the events will have definitely building the environment of higher education where research is there, where different environment is there, where interactions with peer groups are there, and so forth. And once they settle in life, then their narratives will contain different type of situation which will be indicative of that particular time and that particular locale. Locale means the environment in which the events are taking place. Time is the period and locale is the environment. So, what does the atmosphere do? What is atmosphere doing? It is binding the story together. If it is properly designed to the and there is proper setting in its time, then it helps to keep the story together, binds the story together. Means it doesn't allow it to slip from the clutches of the description, and the central theme remains very much visible with the story writer. Means it is available to the reader. So it sets the story in time frame very appropriately. If we are talking about train journey, there is a story about a lady who embarks upon a long train journey, then there is a relevance of the time at which the train departs. So it has to be, the departure has to be there, hustle and bustle at the station, long whistle of the guard, then maybe some other noises indicating that a train is about to depart. All these things have to be explained in the story. You know, we are not talking about their sound effects. We are talking about their descriptions. These descriptions must be there. So the atmosphere has to be created as if the train is departing. Atmosphere has to be created as the lady is traveling in the compartment. Then the ticket inspector is coming, asking for the ticket. Somebody bringing in things to eat. Noise. The door is opening. There's a cranking sound of the door, and so forth. It creates the mood that is very important. And then suddenly, say for example, the character which is a lady traveling alone, traveling alone feels little sad because her friend didn't join the train journey. So that is creating a somber, that is creating a mood. So what will create the mood? The descriptions, the narratives, the the details about the different events will allow the creation of the mood. So that means there can be a description. It was lunchtime. It was dinner time. The dinner had been ordered. So the steward came with the dinner plate and served the dinner. Uh, the lady, didn't show much interest in it and said, "No, please take it. I do not want any dinner." "But why? You had ordered the dinner." "No, but I don't want it right now." So this shows that there is some anxiety, some kind of thought in mind. So this mood is described by the atmosphere. That kind of atmosphere has to be created in which a mood is reflected. It established the locale. Now this is very important. The atmosphere allows the locale to be built in it, and this way it makes the uh, the things look to be authentic. We came to the same point that the descriptions, the details have to be honest and relating to human lives. You see, the atmosphere is very, very important, uh, particularly in novel. Because there are period novels. There are novels which are written about certain period. There are about historical novels, about Gupta period, about modern period, about a lot of other time periods have been depicted in the novels. So we cannot describe the novel in the present atmosphere if it is about Raj, about the British period, then definitely there has to be some royal description, some people who are being exploited, some such happenings. Those are indicative of the Raj or the British period. Another aspect, this is in the novel, because novel is a long story primarily. If you look at the ghost story, ghost stories are always having a very typical environment. Those environments are not very normal environment. It is usually, beginning with a small creek in the darkness of the night, or a sound of owl, and then there is another bird which is trying to fly or making some noise. So all this creates a very different atmosphere. So if that atmosphere is not there, the story will not have proper flight. At the same time, the environment will bring in the drama-like element in it. Things are happening as if they are being staged. So that element is also there. So how the atmosphere is created, I have already told you. There is a lot of description of events, description of the happenings that are taking place. Then they create the atmosphere. Then there are small touches here and there, hints. The descriptions will be presented economically, and then there will be piling up of details. Means a lot of details are added, and all those details will add some element to it. So what I'm trying to say is that environment is very, very important. We have been talking about the situation. So situation is actually the environment, the atmosphere, and the atmosphere allows to uh, create an environment in which the happenings will take place. You see, we if we look at the short stories which are written for the children, it can always be seen that a very typical uh, description, very typical period indication is given. So, for example, if it is fairy tale description, then a very typical situation is created in which the different characters, those belonging to that particular time, are brought into the stories, and then their narratives are also to the tone and likings of the children. Their characters are appropriately chosen. Events are such that they attract the children, and the whole environment is created in an typical atmosphere which is enjoyable by the children. As opposed to ghost stories, the the murmuring of uh, grass, the chattering of birds, will be there. There will be flowers. There will be rising sun. There will be either moon. So all this will, attract the children. Uh, but if we look at the ghost stories, they create a different, atmosphere in which things are, set into a very suspenseful manner, in a very disguised manner, and create a haunted situation where the ghost stories are built and then told. We will come to another point which is very important in as regard to the basic elements in the story. Those are the characters. So if we talk about the importance of the characters in any short story, I think we have to agree that without characters, a story cannot be cannot be told. If I'm saying so, it cannot be told because it is not described; it is told. So it is very important that the characters of the stories, character of a particular story, are chosen very intelligently, very with great consideration, because all the characters must match. If we are coming to the same point again with the match with the time period of the story. That means if it is a historical, it is a story based on the historical events, then characters will also have to be like that only. Their dresses have to be like that only. Their whole narrative structure has to be like that only. And if there are other characters than human, say for example birds, animals, then they also have to be chosen uh, accordingly. You see, there cannot be characters which, or there cannot be birds, or there cannot be animals in a short story which is describing, say for example, the Malgudi days. Then it is very difficult to have a white cheetah in it, see, or a mountain goat there. But if there is a short story about the Himalayas, then there will be uh, mountain goats, there will be maybe white leopard, like that. Or in Himalayas, if we are having short stories about the locales in which there is a description of Himalayas, then there cannot be, animals which resides in the sea. So that has to be commensurating with the story, and the characters have to be commensurating with the environment or the atmosphere of the story. So it is both for the human characters as well as the inhuman or the other characters than human. So, what are the precautions that have to be taken in choosing the story, the characters? The characters have to be developed. I mean, they have to be brought in the development of the story in a harmonious or the in a harmonious interaction with the events. I have already told you that they should be commensurating, they should be correlating with the events. Secondly, what is the purpose of having characters? As I just now told, the story cannot move forward without the help of the different characters. Even if are no dialogues, in description itself, the we can say the bear roared and growled, and all the animals were alert and focused to the heavy sound of the bear. But then suddenly the fox jumped and jiggled. Ha ha ha! This poor bear, this poor creature cannot catch me. I will just simply fly, to the tip of the tree like that. So the 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 the, the sparrow, the birds can make such comments that no, you cannot touch me because I can fly. I can reach the tip of the tree. But if it is a big elephant, that cannot be brought into a situation where there is flying interaction. So what should be done to choose the appropriate characters? So first, the story writer should see the situation, should see the requirement of the situation, and accordingly bring in the character. So character may be human, maybe non-human, and then there should be, visualization of the dimensions of that character as to in which way the character is going to add to this story, whether that is, whether it is only for bringing in the characters or the bringing in the characters with a purpose. This is very important, and one must also remember that the characters should be given full-blooded role. That means they should be allowed then to come up with their fuller capacity. If there shouldn't be too many characters just poking their nose and not making any substantive contribution. One has to be very clear about choosing the characters. They should be need based. They should have full-blooded role, a full-bodied role, and then they should make meaningful contribution. That means they should be related to the activities that are happening and like that. And sometimes the characters are also, rather I should use the word induced or brought into the situation to bring in new dimension. Say, for example, if two people are moving through the woods, they are talking to each other, they are narrating their family situations to one another. Then to bring in a small digression or dilution from that particular discussion, suddenly, bear appears. Then, they become frightened. Then they run for their lives. So then, instead of narrating the happy tales of their lives, they are in search of a refuge so that they can save their lives. So that way, in order to bring in spontaneity, some to make a little digression, to make a little dilution, then also some characters are brought in. There are certain characters which should be, there are certain parameters which should be, which are helpful to choose the right characters. What are those? First of all, it is very important that the author, story writer knows the characters. What it means. Knows the character means they shouldn't be his relative or relative. They cannot be relatives. They cannot be physical men and women. But they, as men and women, should be familiar in the plot itself. Means the plot of the story should be such that there is a scope for bringing in these characters. So that would mean that the characters are actually familiar with the story writer. So familiarity is important because if the author is, you know, familiar, familiar with the situation, then only he or she can bring in the familiar characters. So this is very important that the writer should know the character, means the writer should understand their need. They should be from different milieu. What is the different milieu? That means the characters, if the story which is being developed is being already moving ahead, then there should be characters which do not are from that same background, same family, but they should bring in little spontaneity to the story. So if we look at the different stories, then we find then there is little unannounced uh, uh, addition, which can be also taken as a digression or dilution, but that is always happening only when there is a addition of characters from different milieu. Sometimes we bring in, to make the to make little fantasies or stories which are woven around certain myths and legends. We bring in that kind of characters. We bring a character. Oh yes, suddenly bear appears, but with the human face, or maybe another character, a frog, comes with the very bulging eyes, and like that. Because the reader knows a lot of mythical stories, lot of read about legends. So in stories also sometimes such characters are brought in to enliven our fantasies, or to add certain myths and legends. So accordingly, the characters are brought. Uh, Sometimes we bring in characters to add new labels. In fables or in humanized stories, we bring like a parrot will be there who is helping somebody. Then there will be some other animal character who is behaving like a human and helping the human beings. So we also bring in that kind of character. Another aspect, like we just now discussed, whether the story writer knows the characters or not. Obviously, one should know the characters. If we look at the Tagore's theories, we definitely come to the conclusion that those are very much in acquaintance with the author. It is important that the reader also know them, because if the characters' role or the characters themselves are not very familiar with the characters, then the readers are not able to, what I should use the word, digest it. That means he or she will not be able to understand, and thereby there is the purpose is defeated. So, because sometimes when we read stories about the foreign lands, or the about happenings which are not in our experience, in the reader's experience, then he or she is not able to, mm, able to drive pleasure or to get the message from that. Some examples are given, like in the Scandinavian society, there are certain typical characters. You know, there are certain typical social happenings and events which are not very common to outside world, and there are certain characters which are performing those happenings. So if all those characters are bringing into journal or the formula short stories of India, or say for example in the English short stories which are mainstream English short stories, then you see it is difficult for the reader. So reader must have some idea about those characters so that he or she can accept them as playing some, or discharging or contributing through some role. Finally, whether the author likes the characters or not. This is very important. So if the author likes the characters, only then he or she will develop them as contributing characters. So this is very important. So how do the characters are developed? You see, characters cannot be. They can be brought in, but it is very. It is a. It is a combination of active. It is a combination of descriptions where the real where the characters can be made real life persons. What is the real life persons? The real life persons means they are living the full life in the short story. Means they are having ample scope for mm, giving, for contributing through their fullest potential. So there shouldn't be any prototype. What is prototype? The characters must not be pre-guided. I mean, in a short story, it should be described that yes, now uh, X character is coming, and will be uh, performing the role or like that or something. We cannot say if two people are walking in the woods, then there shouldn't be a description that now there will be a wild elephant who is suddenly will be approaching, so they should be careful. It is not the style. So two people are walking, talking, enjoying their walk. Then there should be sudden roar of the wild elephant that will create a ripples, that will create sense of fear, that will compel the persons to run for their lives and sort. So it will have the wild elephant will have the fullest potential there to frighten the people, to create fear, and then to make them run, flee, and perhaps during that running, fleeing, they will reach a place which is full of potential, which is full of certain things which will eventually help them to to lead a different life. All these things. No stereotypes. I have already told you that there shouldn't be predetermined or biases with the characters, and then they should be kept ordinary and typical. Uh, so they should be allowed to grow to their fullest potential through the narratives. Uh, in fact, what happens? Why characters are there? This is the moot question. Very basic question. Why characters are there? I have already told you that without characters, the story cannot move ahead. It doesn't have the sense of movement or sense of momentum. But what happens finally? Do they take it really forward, and how do they take it? Very basic understanding. The character are the modes of conveying what the writer speaks about. So the writer speaks through the characters. This is what it is. Writer speaks through the characters. Otherwise, the writer cannot come into. How can he or she come directly to the story? So whatever writer feels, he or she speaks through the characters. So his intentions are expressed by the characters. All this is very important. So, and we also know that all characters are not to be treated in the same manner. Some characters are central, some are visiting, some are partial, some are just symbolically present. And the characters in the story should be first person narrative. First person narrative. The characters should not be talking as third person, second person. No, they should be first person. I am so and so, yes, I do this. So a first person narrator cannot behave self consciously. So it is very important that the story, uh, uh, the art of telling a story is in the first person. That is very. This has to be, very clearly indicated. The first person narrator cannot, because the first person narrator, if he or she narrates the story, then he will not talk about himself or herself, but then he or she will talk about actual happenings, something that will give momentum to the story. So first person narrative is very important because it will bring in the other characters, other happenings into it. If we come to the if we come to the other aspect of the story, then that is the ending of the story. Sometimes the character of the protagonist, which is central to the story, you know, he or she simply vanishes from the climax. He or she simply vanishes from the climax, means they do not take part into it, but become, a point of, become an issue of investigation. So there the reader is left to, search for the culmination or the climax. There comes the role of ending. Then that vanishing incident is, explained, and a small melodrama takes place. So the small melodrama is what about giving an effective ending to the story. So sometimes the lead character or the protagonist simply leaves this situation, and the reader is left to search for that, and then the search takes into the search, takes a new direction, a new kind of events, and those events actually are revealed through a melodrama. So the end is always is with a small melodrama. It is not actually drama, but a small event which are played by different characters, and maybe one of the characters will describe where the lead character is now, or when he or she is returning, and then there suddenly appears that lead character and the story ends. So this way the story unfolds. So dear learners, uh, if we understand what is the good end of the story, then obviously there is expected to be small melodrama. So melodrama is not indicating a full or a complete inaction of events, but it is a small technique to, to make the story unfolding. So if it is a small incident in the end, then it indicates the whole or the chain of events which which have taken place in the story, and which were narrated or complemented by different characters which were chosen appropriately by the author. So this melodrama is that which makes the story unfolding, or what we call story. A story is what is told, and a story that unfolds. So the story is told only when there is a melodrama. Then it goes into retrospect, and the whole events of the chain of events becomes very clear. We come to the last part of discussion, which is the narration. Uh, so, what do we mean by? I mean, it is very clear that a story is narrated. So, the narration is very important. So, there is an art in narrating a story. So, this is an essential element in the story as to how the story is. narrated. So this narration part is very, very important because the it is the story is told, it is narrated. How effectively it is narrated, uh, that depends upon the different characters who are playing different parts in the story and making it moving ahead. We all know historically we have been reading about the narrative literatures. We are reading about the Hitopdesh, Katha Sarit Sagar. We have studied, we have learned about the Panchatantra, how different animals and birds, through their narratives, takes these stories ahead and bring in new dimensions, which ultimately gives rise to a chain of events of events which makes space for the newer stories which emanate from one, and then before ending it gives rise to another idea which gets developed into full-fledged story and so forth. So there is an art of saying the short story. So this art is very important, and if you look at the English literature, we have a lot of short stories which are narrated in different styles. So sometimes the short stories uh, those are narrated like once upon a time there was a king. Sometimes we start narration like it was midnight, all around was darkness pitched to its deadliest form. Sometimes we say it was the early morning, sun was about to rise, like that. And sometimes we say uh, uh, in the deep gorge there was a creaking voice coming, and nearby uh, another bird was, chirping like this. So there are different types of narratives in the novels. It begins. The novels have a method of stories as an invention, and then you see there is a kind of style of narratives which is itself answer to the query that has been raised in the beginning. Like if it is a novel about the freedom struggle, then there will be narratives in the beginning that would begin the novel, like living in the chained society, or in the foreign ruled society is curse for the humankind. There have been different societies living around the world which have been ruled by other kings, those who came from far and distant countries, invaded their nations, and then start ruling the people like this. But if the novel is about romance, about the scientific innovation, then the beginning will be different. So we see that sometimes there are stories which are about the invention. They put questions, and then there are answers to those questions. Sometimes there are challenges which are posed. And then eventually the story will unfold, and through long description, those challenges will be met by the different characters, and it will make a kind of historical story narrated through different characters, freedom fighters, oppressors, different people of the community like peasants, soldiers, and other people who are serving different people like those. So all these characters will be speaking different types of narratives and taking the story ahead. So briefly, we can say that the essential of the stories or the basic elements of the story of the stories are primarily the form, the structure, the plot, the atmosphere, the environment, or what I said, situation. We have been talking about the situation. If there is no situation, there can't be any creation. So there has to be a situation, be it for poetry or for short story. For short story, there has to be a plot, and then it has to be built in, developed, and then number of other characters have to be brought into it. The characters have a very important role because in short stories, who will speak to whom about what. So the story writer wants to speak through his or her characters. They bring in new events into it, new happenings. They make new happenings through their dialogues or through their sometimes through the monologues also, but like that. And as far as the choice of characters are concerned, there are certain parameters for it. The characters should be appropriate to the events. They should commensurate with the requirement of the events. They should be allowed to come to full potential. The real life persons, they should be allowed to become. And sometimes we know the characters are brought into, give either to digress or to ingress, to dilute from the uh, current situation, current scenario, current topic. So that adds new dimensions to it. And finally, it is very important that the narratives are properly written. They are according to the time period, according to the locales, which we read in the very beginning. That atmosphere is very important because atmosphere will give rise to environment, and environment will describe the happenings. And if the right choice is there about the environment and the atmosphere, then that would seem genuine to the reader, to the person who is there as a target for the writings. So it is very important that the descriptions are primarily having some relation with the human lives, because after all, the creative literature primarily revolves around the human lives. So it cannot be something very fictional. It has to be fictionalized. So that means the truth has to be fictionalized. Sometimes we have characters who come from the foreign land. So if we understand the environment of that foreign land, the atmosphere of the foreign land, maybe we might accept the uh, characters, you know. But if the environment is, say, for example, our own locales, our own atmosphere, then those characters from the foreign land will not get absorbed into it. So that would be a good selection. So with that, I come to the closure of our today's session, which was about the basic elements of a short story. We discussed the need of structure, that is the form. That means it should have beginning, it should have developmental phase, it should have end or the conclusion, which is the structure of any writing. So that is one. Then the atmosphere, the environment, the situation, and then we discuss the characters, their need, their role, their importance, their selection, then the narratives, their need, the nature of the narratives, and we, more importantly, all these things are supposed to uh, keep the story bind together. Most importantly, whether it is narrative, whether it is character, whether it is atmosphere, all this must have very essentially the main lead, the main thesis at the center of the, whether it is development, whether it is narratives, or whether it is character. So all that is very important is that the story is kept intact and it always falls within the center of all these happenings. So with this, I come to the conclusion of today's session. Akshita is there. Akshita, do you wish to interact or ask some question?
No, sir, I don't have any question.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So, so I'll then say goodbye for the today's session. We'll meet tomorrow and discuss our next topic. That is the that will be, the writing for children. So we will discuss about the short stories for children, which all of us know are quite different from. I mean, they are slightly different from the mainstream stories. They have a lot of animations, lot of imaginary images. So we will discuss that, and we will discuss as to how to choose the appropriate themes for children's stories, how those are treated, and what is important in choosing the characters. What is the, above all, what is the role of the fantasy in the children's short stories? Because those are full of fantasy, imagination, and so forth. So we will discuss that, and we will also discuss about the narratives. What type of narratives are there in the children's short stories? So I think tomorrow is again going to be very interesting discussion, and along with it, we will also discuss the language and illustration. Uh, there's definitely different style used in the language. Sometimes we bring in new words in the short stories. Those are difficult words. How do we introduce them? How do we relate it to the previous memory of the child or children? And how do we, avoid, the uh, verbiage, and also, strengthen one's writing through the use of such words. So we will discuss about the use of language and particularly the use of illustration in children's short stories. Sometimes there are sketches, there are cartoons. Why those are there and how do they contribute? So we'll use the sentence structure, style, and the tone, and also the dialogues, particularly in the fiction. So with that, I close today's session. I hope more learners will join us tomorrow when we talk about the children's short stories, how they are written, what are the narrative forms, what is the type of language that is used, what is the use of uh, different illustrations, and like that. So, Akshita and RC and others who are with us in this session, I say very good day, and hope that we meet tomorrow at the right time and continue our discussion. Good day. Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, RC. So we will meet tomorrow. Thanks a lot.